Monsieur Cyril de Guindre by Leonora Carrington. On a heavy, balmy spring afternoon, Monsieur Cyril de Guindre was resting elegantly on his ice-blue couch. Moving like a tired snake, he was playing with his cat. Despite his age, he was very beautiful. "His face is that of an albino orchid," said his great friend, the Boat Lestrade. "His greedy violet mouth is a poisonous bee orchid like a lunar insect. And where can you find a rare animal with a coat comparable to his hair?" Monsieur de Guindre sighed in his halo of perfume, thinking of the boat, who was already half an hour late for tea. The garden was so intensely green that he had to shield his eyes. "Your gaze tires me as much as the garden," he said to his cat. "Shut your eyes." He didn't notice the boat, who had come silently into the room, carrying a bouquet of moss roses. The boat, who was a great deal younger than Cyril de Guindre, had golden skin, like the corpse of a child, preserved in an old and excellent liqueur. He wore an elegant dressing gown, the color of trout flesh, and his face, behind the roses, was livid with anger. "Ah, the boat," Cyril said in a weary voice. Whatever have you been doing all afternoon to keep me waiting like this? You know very well that I take tea at 5 o'clock. As does everyone, indeed." The boat threw the roses at the cat, which growled and clawed at Cyril's thighs, looking across the flowers with malevolent eyes. "Moreover," continued Cyril, disentangling his cat from the roses, "I have an important project that I've been wanting to discuss with you. But since you seem to prefer nature to my company, I hesitate to tell you what I have in mind." The boat shrugged. "Will you please explain?" he retorted. "How has it come about that your garden is infested with nymphs?" His voice hissed with anger. "Nymphs?" Cyril asked. "Wherever have you been seeing nymphs?" His hand trembled a little as he arranged the lace on his chest. "I saw a young girl beside the lake," the boat said sharply. "Who is she?" Cyril reflected for a few moments. His eyes closed, but he did not stop fondling his cat. "Ring for a bottle of champagne, dearest the boat, and I'll explain it to you." The boat obeyed with bad grace. "First of all," said Cyril, when he had a crystal goblet full of champagne in his hand, "first of all, tell me, was the girl pretty?" "I hardly saw her," replied the boat, looking distraught. "Why should it interest you?" "It interests me, my dearest the boat, because that little girl is probably a very close relation of mine. She could even be my daughter." A painful smile played around the boat's lips, which held a cigarette, and his fingers clawed the arms of his chair. "Really?" "Yes. 20 years ago, I committed the indiscretion of taking a woman. Moreover, I married her. She was extremely tiring, an uncivilized creature, painfully lacking in delicacy. Lacking as was her wont, she became pregnant 6 years after we were married. The grossness of her physique during those 9 months made me fall quite ill. I was obliged, my dear Thebaut, to stay in bed for several weeks after her daughter's birth. I suffered greatly, imagining myself pregnant. Thanks only to the massage administered by Weng To, a Chinese, was I finally put back on my feet." "And then?" asked the boat in a blank voice. "And then," said Cyril, moistening his lips with champagne, "I began to imagine that I had sexual relations with a mermaid who was forever fondling me with her heavy, limp tail, wetting my pink dressing gown." The boat stopped him with an irritated movement. I didn't ask for details of your psychological state. I wanted to hear what happened to this domestic ideal. I'm coming to that, answered Cyril with a sigh. My wife never regained her normal state of mind. Actually, she's in a sanatorium. A very comfortable one, of course. She suffers from strange hallucinations and an unfortunate simple-mindedness. I haven't seen her for 10 years. The boat's face was filled with disgust. He swayed like a drunk. Charming. Charming, he murmured between dry lips. And the girl? I placed her in the good hands of the Purple Sisters of the Convent of the Holy Tomb. These excellent nuns have taken care of her moral and worldly education. The little girl's name is Pantilde, a whim of her mother's. Now, darling Thibaut, you know as much about my life as I do myself. The boat got up very pale, saying he had to go rest. Pantilde, murmured Cyril de Guindre. Whatever shall I do if you're ugly? I shall make you disappear gently into the emerald water of my lake, for I can't endure ugliness. She ought to be 14. Awkward age. If only she doesn't end up looking like her mother. What a disaster. Whatever shall I do with a girl? He rang for his servant, a bloated young man who looked like a plump hen cooked in an aromatic stock. His name was Dominique, and he had the gestures of a Jesuit. Monsieur, he murmured while arranging the cushions behind Cyril's head. Dominique, my succulent plant. When you were a J brother at the Jesuits, did you ever hear of the Purple Sisters of the Convent of the Holy Tomb? Dominic looked at the ground with his milky eyes. There was the abbot, monsieur, who from time to time went to the good sisters to say mass and hear confessions. Ah, and what did he think of them? Brother Carillon, who assisted the abbot with his bath, told me that the abbot was always jaunty after his visits to the Convent of the Holy Tomb. He always scented himself with bitter almonds on the eve of his visits. May I add that the abbot knew how to savor the agreeable subtleties of life? Dominique, go and prepare my bath of rose water. This evening I shall make up with peacock green powder. Afterwards, go into the garden and find me the little girl who is playing near the lake. Dominique bowed and went out backwards. Lay out my Angora gown, added Cyril with closed eyes, and the Pope's striped socks. The final detail of Cyril de Guindre's toilette were a few drops of opium essence behind his ears. He looked with satisfaction at his reflection in the mirror. He really had beautiful ears, delicate as geranium leaves. He bent towards the mirror and kissed the reflection of his lips, leaving a crimson mark the shape of a bird in flight. Precious mummy, he murmured, laughing. Who knows? Won't you have fun after all? Slowly, he went down the marble staircase. Pantilde was standing in the middle of the drawing room. They looked at each other in silence. Cyril saw a little girl of 14, dressed like a pupil of a convent school. Her dress was made of stiff black material and had a little white collar at the throat. Her skinny legs were covered in thick black wool. A straw hat hid her face. Her long black hair was braided into correct plaits. An inch or two more and they would have reached the ground. After a few moments' silence, Cyril advanced toward her and cautiously took off her hat. He was astonished by her perverse beauty. She resembled him very much. Pantilde, he said finally, don't you recognize your father? She threw him a vague glance and shook her head. No, monsieur, I don't know you. How long have you been staying here? He asked with an immense effort. He was irritated by a slight smile on Panthilde's lips that disappeared immediately. "I don't know, monsieur. It seems to me that I've been here some time. I study every day with the abbot." Cyril felt so tired that he went to lie down on the couch. He lit a special myrrh-scented cigarette and soon fell asleep, though he remained vaguely conscious. He had the feeling Pantilde was sitting near his head, singing with a child's high-pitched voice, "Daddy, don't cry, I'll buy a dolly in a coach one day." Across a cloud of sleep, he saw Pantilde take a little jar from her pocket, dip her lips into its black and sticky contents, and put her face close to his. Her lips were black and gleaming like the back of a beetle. Then he felt himself compelled, quite against his will, to taste her lips. He opened his mouth and moved towards her, but she moved her head out of reach, laughing. He trembled with horror and desire. "Papa wants spring," Pantilde said in a mocking voice. "Papa wants spring. Papa wants spring." She began to chant the monotonous rhythm of the words. "Papa wants spring." Cyril went to sleep. He woke up with the boat looking at him, the boat in a tight suit that fit his body as closely as a second skin. "Good heavens," Cyril said. "Is it already time for dinner?" Dinner was served as usual on the terrace of the Weeping Willows. Cyril sat opposite the boat across a bronze table in the shape of a poppy, dreaming amongst the scents of the garden and the food. His eyes were tired. Dominique prowled around the table with soft steps, serving delicate dishes, a plump, fat chicken with stuffing made of brains and the livers of thrushes, truffles, crushed sweet almonds, and rose conserve with a few drops of some divine liqueur. This chicken, which had been marinated, plucked but alive for 3 days, had in the end been suffocated in vapors of boiling patchouli. Its flesh was as creamy and tender as a fresh mushroom. A chilled asparagus mousse and creamed oysters were followed by a procession of strange and succulent cakes, all white yet as varied as the animals in a zoological garden. Cyril and the boat tasted each, conversing from time to time while listening to music played by a little boy dressed as an angel. The boat spoke of a suit he intended to have made. "It will hardly be a suit for going out in," he said, "but rather for the privacy of the boudoir, tea for two. The trousers are to be made of a rosy beige fur, and very delicately striped in another color, like the pants of a Persian cat. The shirt will be of a very pale green, like the feathers of a dying kingfisher, half hidden by an acid blue jacket, brilliant like the scales of the fish. What do you think of it?" "Ravishing," Cyril replied, taking a bite out of some fruit. "But I'd have the shirt made in a velvet of green verging on ochre, a moss green." He stopped abruptly, putting his hand to his forehead. On the rose-colored stone wall, the shadows of 2 horses were fighting with frightful ferocity. The terrible battle only lasted a few seconds. The shadows faded, and Cyril, very pale, turned his head and saw behind him a priest. "Monsieur, the abbot of Guindre," said Dominique's voice. The abbot's soutane was green with dust and riddled with the depredations of moths. His chin and shaved skull were blue, his face somber. De Guindre felt overcome by nausea as the abbot held out a hand he couldn't refuse to take, a hand long and thin like a woman's, and like the cast skin of a snake. "My dear Monsieur de Guindre," said the abbot in a gentle voice, "what a pleasure to come to know all this. At last." He indicated with a gesture an imaginary circle around him. My ecclesiastical work has prevented me from meeting you as soon as I would have wished. I have, however, had the great pleasure of being of some little use to Mademoiselle de Guindre in her studies. With a smile of charming frankness, he took a chair and sat down beside Cyril. He ignored the boat. This heavy weather, continued the abbot, helping himself to a very large piece of vanilla-flavored anemone cake, has a narcotic effect on the spirit. Don't you agree, my dear de Guindre? But your delightful garden is a veritable cradle of flowers, and often when I walk under your flowering almond trees, an animal runs past me on mysterious paths. Often? You often walk in my garden? Asked Cyril in astonishment. Please forgive my curiosity, but how long have you been a regular visitor to my property? Often, the abbot repeated in an ardent tone of voice. I know every flower, every plant, every tree. You might say that the Abbé de Greaves is the house spirit of the de Guindre garden. He took a branch of honeysuckle from his breast and held it under the nose of Cyril, who smelled it avidly. His crimson lips became black as they touched the flowers, his face weary and pale with pleasure. The boat did not move, but his eyes were dry and fierce. It seemed to him that the new moon descended from the sky and glided between the leaves of the weeping willows, coming to rest at last on the priest's head, its pointed crescent thrusting into his glittering skull. Pantilde, who at that moment arrived from the garden, remained at a distance. She looked at the three men, however, with a somber eye. Pantilde, asked the abbot, looking at Cyril and barely concealing a certain anxiety in his voice. Are you there? Aren't you playing in the moonlight any more? She rolled her eyes angrily. Come, continued the abbot. Come and say good evening to your papa. The boat shuddered and clawed at the table. Pantilde did not move. She breathed heavily while looking at the table in an anguished way. That smell, Cyril said in a thick voice. I feel sick. He tried to get up, but the abbot held him firmly by the arm and laughed.